the latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems in Cumbria, about a mile east of Workington. The A66 is blocked in both directions at the scene of a four-vehicle collision just off the Stainburn roundabout. There are queues coming from Bridgeford as a result, looking at the sensors. On the M60 in Greater Manchester, lanes closed on the anti-clockwise entry slip at junction 24, the Denton Island turn, where a car's broken down. In Cambridgeshire on the M11 southbound, one lane's closed from junction 10 at Duxford to 8 heading into Essex towards Stansted, past the scene of an accident. And on the M4 in Berkshire, one lane's closed eastbound from junction 6 to 5, just east of Slough, where a lorry's broken down. And the westbound exit is partly blocked further along at junction 8 at Maidenhead, where a car's broken down. And buses replaced trains up in County Durham, in Bishop Auckland and Darlington because of a points failure. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's the biggest, greatest Great British giveaway so far, with your chance to win a spectacular £50,000 in tax-free cash. 2025 could be amazing, with plenty of treats, holidays and fun on the horizon. How would you enjoy that cash? £50,000 will make someone our biggest ever winner. For your chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, it's 6 p.m. and I'm Miriam Cates. Coming up during the next hour on Dewbs & Co. The Prime Minister says he is not planning to impose any more tax rises before the next general election. But he also admitted he could not rule them out in the event of unforeseen circumstances. So, as the economy stagnates and the costs of health and pensions grow, is a tax squeeze inevitable? And in that big speech yesterday, the Prime Minister pledged to build 1.5 million new homes over the next 5 years. But the National Federation of Builders has warned that a shortage of construction workers threatens to derail that target unless they're allowed to recruit immigrants from abroad. So we'll be asking, where have Britain's builders gone? And for the first time, a national opinion poll has put Reform UK ahead of the Labour Party. The snapshot by polling company Find Out Now put Nigel Farage's party on 24% of the vote, 1 point ahead of Labour and 2 points behind the Tories. But another poll today has Reform in third place on 21%. Nevertheless, is the insurgent party about to break through Britain's two-party system? And a big fat disappointment. Millions of obese people will be denied free weight loss injections due to a lack of NHS capacity. Should the taxpayer fund drugs to help the overweight slim down, or is it time for some personal responsibility? And joining me tonight, I've got my panel, Charlie Downs, political commentator, and Paul Embry, trade unionist and broadcaster. But first, here are your latest news headlines.
Very good evening. It's just gone 6 o'clock. I'm Sphere Hill with your latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Our top story this evening, and Storm Dara has sparked a rare red warning for wind, with gusts of up to 90 miles an hour expected to batter parts of Wales and the southwest of England, including Cardiff, Bristol and Devon. The warning, in place from 3 a.m. tomorrow, calls for people to take care, as flying debris and falling trees could pose a danger to life. An amber warning is also in place for the west coast of the UK, from Scotland to Cornwall and Northern Ireland, with large waves and potential damage to homes and buildings. Heavy rain and over 100 flood warnings are also in effect, adding to the weekend's challenges. Now, Sir Keir Starmer says civil servants will help to push through new changes under the Labour government. The PM praised civil servants, saying they bring a strong sense of public service. This comes as there are calls from the Union for Senior Civil Servants, saying Starmer needs to immediately rebuild trust with the civil service after using Trumpian language to describe them.
The milestones in my speech this week about what the government is going to do to change the lives of people across the country that we want to be measured by. At the same time, I made it clear they'll be used to drive through the change in the way the government delivers. And I think lots of civil servants will say, good, great, give us the leadership, we want that change too.
Now, in Scotland, a farm has been placed under lockdown after a cow tested positive for atypical mad cow disease. The Scottish Government has imposed strict movement restrictions on affected animals, although it says there is no risk to public health and the cow didn't enter the food chain. The case in Dumfries and Galloway was detected through routine surveillance, and investigations are now underway to determine its origin. Authorities have assured the public that stringent control measures are in place to prevent any wider impact. And to Europe, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has signed a controversial trade deal with South American countries, which could have significant impact on farmers in the UK. The deal has been met with firm opposition from several EU member states and is expected to face a backlash from the farming sectors across Europe, with a significant impact in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. European farmers have consistently protested against the EU-Mercosur deal, arguing it could lead to cheap imports of South American food, particularly beef, which they claim does not meet the EU's environmental and food safety standards. And the Princess of Wales has arrived at Westminster Abbey ahead of the start of her annual Christmas service this evening. Princess Kate was joined by her husband and children, with the young royals stopping at the kindness tree outside the Abbey to hang messages in dedication to someone who has supported them during their lives. This year's Together at Christmas event celebrates love and empathy, with 1,600 guests invited. In a message sent ahead of the service, Kate said Christmas is a moment of celebration and joy, as well as an opportunity to slow down and reflect on the things that connect us all. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sphere Hill. I'll be back in an hour, but for now, it's back to Miriam.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and joining me until 7 o'clock, I've got my panel, Charlie Downs, political commentator, and Paul Embury, trade unionist and broadcaster. And as always, I want to know your views about the topics we're going to be discussing, so please go on gbnews.com/your say, and we will be reading out some of your opinions later on in the show. Well, our first story tonight, Sir Keir Starmer has declined to rule out further tax rises before the next general election, despite Chancellor Rachel Reeves claiming less than 2 weeks ago that taxes will not increase again. Take a listen.
I don't want to in any way suggest that we're going to keep coming back for more, because that isn't the plan. That
so no more tax rises.
So we did the tough stuff in order to stabilise, because what individuals and particularly businesses have said to me is, look, do the tough stuff, but then we need the degree of certainty. We need to know that things aren't going to materially change. So that's the approach we've taken. What I can't do is say to you there are no circumstances unforeseen in the future that wouldn't lead to any change at all.
Well, just last week, the Chancellor explicitly ruled out further tax rises in an address to the CBI, where she told business leaders, "I'm really clear, I'm not coming back with more borrowing or more taxes." Taxes are, of course, at a record high at the moment, but can or even should further rises ever be ruled out? And would you be willing to pay more taxes if needed? Charlie, the Prime Minister's wise, isn't he? He can't rule out a war, a major fiscal event that might mean he has to raise taxes.
No, he can't, and maybe it was down to Rachel Reeves, running her mouth saying that they're definitely not going to raise them again. Because, I mean, that in and of itself, it's not a great look, is it, to have a divided ruling class in that kind of way, where one person's saying one thing, the other is saying another. It's just not great. But my sort of stance on this, to be honest, is, look, tax is a necessary evil. And I'm actually a big believer in the idea that the state can be used to do positive things for a country, right? I'm not a libertarian. I think the state is a good thing. But the question is who, right? Because at the moment, our state is occupied by idiots who clearly don't know how to spend our money. For example, at least £23 billion a year is being spent explicitly on foreigners. So this is things like foreign aid, on which we spend about 15 billion, housing asylum seekers, about 5.5 billion, and so-called climate aid, which is approaching 5 billion. So these are areas that are obviously wasteful, obviously not in the interests of the British people, and it should be there that our government looks for cuts first, rather than immediately going and taxing ordinary people. Because as everyone knows, that just makes people poorer, doesn't improve the country.
Paul, he's right, isn't it? It's not an objection to paying tax in principle that people have. It's whether or not they believe that money is being well spent.
Yeah, and Keir Starmer took the only line that a Prime Minister, I think, can realistically take. You can't rule out tax rises for the next 4 to 5 years. It is possible there will be another pandemic, there may be a war, there may be another unforeseen event. The real question is, where do those tax rises, if they are necessary, where do they fall? As someone on the left, I think that there are pretty grotesque wealth and income inequalities in this country at the moment. So if there are going to be taxes levied on a group of people at some point in the future, then I think it's imperative on a Labour government to say that they will be levied on the people who can bear those taxes.
But if you're talking about wealthy people in terms of people who earn a lot of income rather than multinational corporations, let's put them in a separate box, then those wealthy people who are earning a lot of income have already been taxed extortionately, some would say, under the last Conservative government, incredibly progressive regime. The top 1% of income earners now pay 28% of tax. That's the highest share than ever before. Can you really squeeze any more out of that group of people?
Miriam, I've got the stats in front of me. The 5 richest families in the UK are richer than the poorest 20% of the population. The top 1% of households have 230 times the amount of wealth as the poorest 10% of households. Now, I'm not somebody who believes in punitive taxation. I don't say we should tax people just for the sake of it, tax people until the pips squeak. But actually, by international standards, by European standards, we're not actually that heavily taxed. Certainly by our own standards, historically, it's higher than it has been historically. But if you look at countries in Europe, it's not particularly high by their standards. And I believe that there is scope for upping the taxation, frankly, on the multinationals. Yeah, I'm absolutely in favour of going for the multinationals and the people who employ very clever accountants who create loopholes and help them get away with not evading tax, but avoiding tax. And the richest people in society, like, you know, some of the families and households that I just talked about there. And actually, you know, looking for example, a windfall tax from the banks. I mean, the banks have made mega profits as a result of the interest rate rises over the last couple of years. Unexpected excess profits. Why shouldn't we go to them for a few billion?
Yeah, I mean, that's right, isn't it, Charlie? There are people who can afford to pay more tax. But do you think there comes a point when actually it's a disincentive to work? You know, if you've got a marginal tax rate of 60%, let's say, as some people do, not necessarily the very wealthy, but people crossing tax bands, why would you do that extra shift at work if you only keep 40p of every pound?
Moreover, it's a disincentive to live here. Like, not just not to work, it's just why would you remain in this country if you're not going to get a fair day's pay, right? Because of taxation. It's just, you know, it's logical that you would leave. But this is the problem with the kind of... And the other thing about this topic, actually, about tax, that I don't see a lot of people ever talking about, is the more fundamental question about what this says about how our country has changed. Because I think that there is a world where if you have a cohesive, high-trust society where everybody feels they belong, where everybody feels a sense of shared identity, shared nationhood, belonging, taxation becomes, there is a sense that it's your duty to pay tax. Because at the moment, we live in an economic environment where it's just understood in terms of profit and loss. If it's a net negative, I'm just going to leave.
Do you think then that actually the personal tax allowance, the amount of money you can earn before paying tax, is actually too high? Too many people are taken out of the tax system. Shouldn't we have a much, much lower rate of tax, let's say 5 or 10%, but make sure that more people pay tax so that they feel part of the system and they are contributing?
I don't disagree with that, but again, we first of all have to address the more fundamental issue of the fact that our nation doesn't really have much in the way of shared identity anymore, partly because of mass migration, but also because of, house building is something we're going to talk about later on today. You look at the way this country looks now, the built environment of this country, it's not somewhere that people feel proud of. And Paul, you were talking about inequality, and I agree that perception of inequality at the ground level is hugely important, because if people feel that there are people who are kind of getting one over on them and who are not paying their fair share, I think that leads to a real feeling of resentment, and perhaps rightfully so, among those people. And all the while we have that kind of cultural and social environment, this really, we're talking about issues that are downstream from that when we talk about tax.
Charlie, it reduces economic performance as well.
Yeah.
Wider inequalities actually reduce economic performance. Yeah. So it's important, I think, for any nation, not just from the point of view of having a civilised, cohesive nation, but in terms of economic performance, to make sure that there aren't those hideous inequalities.
Yeah, one of the things we've seen in recent...
social unrest.
Yeah, one of the things we've seen in recent days is the number of people on disability benefits, and the problem is that the differential between benefits and low-paid work is now so small that it's often not worth coming off those benefits. But just before we move on to the break, isn't the problem, though, in this country, and in fact in the whole of the West, that actually tax rises are not mostly due to government excess or waste? They're actually a function of an ageing population. We don't have enough people coming into the workforce. We've got lots and lots of people claiming pensions. I mean, aren't tax rises just absolutely inevitable unless we increase the birth rate?
Well, we need growth in the economy, Miriam. That's the key thing. We've had 15 years of stagnation in the economy, and until we get growth, until we create that prosperity, we create that extra wealth, where we get more buoyant tax revenues as a result of that, then we're going to have problems. And the only way we're going to get growth, I've said on this show before, is by investment. I mean, this idea from Rachel Reeves, if we can't afford it, we can't do it, I think is completely back to front. Actually, you will be able to afford it if you invest and you create growth in the economy and you improve productivity and you increase your tax revenues, then you can afford stuff. So she's rewritten John Maynard Keynes, and not in a very good way, frankly. This kind of fiscal straitjacket she's put herself into, I think, is likely potentially to lead to a recession. And
well, you have set us up perfectly for our next debate, because coming up, Labour have pledged a golden era of house building investment, promising 1.5 million new homes. But is it realistic? Don't go away.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Cryptocurrency entrepreneur Justin Sun spent $6.2 million, £4.9 million, on a banana, duct taped to a wall, a piece of art by artist Mauricio Catalan. Other artwork has recently caused controversy. A portrait of the British computer scientist Alan Turing by the world's first ultra-realistic robot artist, that is to say ADAR, sold at auction for almost $1.1 million. Joining me now to talk about these latest hoo-has is art critic and mentor at the University of Arts London, Estelle Lovett. I have a feeling that in the case of the banana, it's quite a lot to do with the buyer. Now, you've researched the buyer a little bit. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Justin Sun?
Yes, so he's a very wealthy cryptocurrency dealer. And of course, everything now is AI and FTs, and it's the way that money's going, and it's very good publicity for him. So obviously, he's not daft. But what makes this banana so unusual is, and it has, as you say, taken the art world by storm. It is the current spectacle, and what's amazing is that even during these very difficult times, the art market still manages to spend big on a significant fuss. Why has it created this fuss? Well, don't forget, the winning bid just happened in a matter of minutes. It took Justin Sun minutes to beat 6 other rivals. So they've all got mega bucks in their pocket. But, you know, it's conceptual art at its best.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and keeping me company until 7 o'clock, I've got political commentator Charlie Downs and Paul Embry, trade unionist and broadcaster. Well, the Labour government is pledging to tackle NIMBYism and launch a golden age of house building as one of Sir Keir Starmer's 6 milestones announced yesterday.
Not just 1.5 million homes, but also 150 major infrastructure projects. And just as importantly, will send a very clear message to the NIMBYs, the regulators, the blockers, the bureaucrats, the alliance of naysayers, the people who say, no, Britain can't do this. We can't get things done in our country. Well, we say to them, you no longer have the upper hand. Britain says yes.
Wow, but the pledge has been met with criticism, some branding the target of 1.5 million homes by the end of Parliament as unrealistic. And in related news, the price of housing in the UK hit record highs last month. As Halifax reported, the average value of a UK home is now close to £300,000, up £5,000 just from the month before. So, are Keir Starmer's house building plans realistic, and will they reduce the cost of housing? Well, Paul, you were saying before the break that investment is exactly what the government needs to do. Is this the kind of thing that they should be doing?
Yes, absolutely, but it should go further because I think it's a national emergency, housing at the moment. Millions of families can't get on or thousands of families can't get on the housing ladder. We've got a chronic shortage of housing, and yeah, he's absolutely right, I think. To take on the blockers and the bureaucrats. We need lots more homes in this country to address what I think is a very, very serious problem. And I often cite the post-war Labour government, which, led by Clement Attlee, built 1 million homes at a time when the country was being told we can't afford it, we're on our knees, we've just fought a war. And actually, thousands of families moved out of slum housing and into decent, usually council accommodation. And we don't do that anymore. We don't build council houses anymore because of the shortage. It has the impact of not just the fact that thousands of families can't get homes, but it just obviously pushes the prices up. So people when they are lucky enough to get a home and get a mortgage are often paying exorbitant rates. I mean, a recent study showed that families are spending something like 40% of their take-home pay. First-time buyers spending 40% of their take-home pay on mortgage repayments. Now, until you've got a situation where we do have a massive expansion of ideally council housing, but all sorts of housing, social housing and whatever. And I think the Financial Times did a study where they said to keep pace with the rising population, we need to build something like 500,000 homes a year. So I think Starmer's right. He's hit on something. It is a key priority, but it doesn't go far enough.
Well, that's right, Charlie. It doesn't go far enough, does it? And it sounds ambitious, but actually it's only 300,000 homes a year over the Parliament. And I think we've got the statistics of the number of houses that have been built over the last period of time. And actually, Conservatives managed about 220,000 houses a year. Here we go here, which obviously isn't enough, but it's not far short of what Starmer is proposing. Is this really going to make any difference?
OK, so I think there's a number of levels that have to be addressed when it comes to this conversation. So first of all, I am 20 23 years old. I'm getting married next year. I'm thinking about buying... thank you very much. I'm thinking about buying a house. I'm looking at the market and I'm thinking, my gosh, how the heck am I ever going to afford to live in this country, to lay down roots and to own a piece of private property, which is an essential part of starting a family and having a stake in society, feeling, again, that sense of belonging that I was talking about before. So I look at that and I think, OK, well, what's the problem here? Why is it so expensive? One answer is we're not building enough houses. But the other is we've got too many people. Because the fact of the matter is that population isn't growing as a result of native birth rates. The birth rate of native British people is 1.5. This is not replacement rate. We have an ageing population. Therefore, the only population growth is coming from mass migration. You know, we had nearly 1 million net people come in the year to 2023,
and yet we only built 220,000 houses.
Indeed, but why? Then that leads us on to the next point, which we have to ask: well, why exactly? Where I live in Kent, right? I live in sort of the rural-urban fringe, and I'm seeing the fields that I played in when I was a child be paved over to make way for these kind of IKEA-esque, flat-pack-looking, identical rows of houses, which have no soul, they have no aesthetic kind of depth to them. They just look like completely interchangeable. And again, these sound like trivial, superficial things, but they really aren't. Because if you want to have a sense of a nation, then you have to. There has to be a.
You can't underestimate the very real social problems that do occur when kids are being brought up in substandard accommodation.
It's one of the biggest indicators of educational performance, isn't it? But is it just supply? I mean, obviously there is a shortage of houses, especially in London and the South East. But we also have this crazy financialisation of the system where, because interest rates were so low for so long, people could just borrow more and more money, so you get foreign investors, particularly in London, just pushing up the price. And you get the sense that some of these house builders are just hanging on to the houses, releasing them little by little to keep the prices high. So if the same happens, will this even bring down the prices?
Well, the banks have got an extraordinary monopoly power, haven't they? Because they can essentially create money out of thin air and give it to people as a loan, as a mortgage, and simply flood in the market, as they've been able to do, because no one seems to want to regulate them in this way, as just effectively applied a pair of bellows to the housing market and just pushed up prices to an astronomical level. So that absolutely needs to be dealt with. I think the banks need to be restrained in terms of their ability to essentially just create money out of nothing, give it to people, and as a result of that, pushing house prices up. But we can't underestimate, too, the population increase, definitely. I mean, it would be disingenuous, whatever your politics.
It's just mathematical.
Of course, it's a reality, and it would be disingenuous, whatever your politics, to deny that has had an impact. But we do, I think, also need to look at things like family breakdown. Because the truth is, where families quite often these days don't stick together. One parent will go one way and one parent will go the other. That itself creates much extra demand.
The average, the average household size has decreased, which means you need more houses for the same amount of people. But Charlie, is this actually an argument for the state building social houses?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm not against the concept of social housing. In a country like Britain, in the year 2024, we're a first world country, we should be leading the world in all areas, to be honest, but we aren't for various reasons, primarily idiotic leaders. But I don't think we should be having homeless people, British people, on the streets. You know, like you walk around London. I don't live in London, but I come here a lot for work. You walk around London, every time I come here, it seems like there's more and more homeless people around. That, to me, is a damning indictment of our society. We shouldn't have homeless people, right? And the way that you solve that problem is through things like social housing. So I'm completely in favour of the existence of social housing.
It gets the banks out of the equation, and people can rent them at
and if I may, just very quickly, Rupert Lowe yesterday published some data that he'd written to the Commons about, and he has found that there were 33,075 non-UK lead tenants accessing social housing in the year to 2024. How crazy is that, right? This is foreigners, people not born in the UK, accessing social housing at the taxpayer's expense.
I was brought up on what was once the biggest municipal housing estate in the world, the Becontree Council Estate in Dagenham. And it's still, the estate is still there today. It was built in the 1920s and 1930s. Good, solid homes, spacious, front gardens, back gardens, you know, much better in many respects than the private sort of shoe boxes that are thrown up today. And there was a real kind of sense of belonging. There was a sense of community about the whole place, and I wouldn't have swapped it for the world. I think the stability that gives kids, being able to be brought up with their parents in an affordable but good standard home, I think sets their trajectory for many of them for the rest of their lives. And I think we've turned a blind eye to that. And I think we've created a huge number of social problems because we haven't grasped it.
Indeed. Well, we'll have more on that soon, because coming up, is Reform UK more popular than Labour? According to a new poll, they are. We'll be digging into that shortly, so don't go anywhere.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Storm Dara is expected to bring heavy outbreaks of rain and some severe gales at times as we head into the weekend. Hail snow too for Scotland, and there are multiple Met Office warnings in force, so do stay up to date on our website for those. This is Storm Dara here out to the west, bringing in heavy outbreaks of rain alongside these frontal systems and a good squeeze in the Isobars, so very strong winds at times across the bulk of the country, particularly around western coasts. These outbreaks of rain are set to continue overnight, still falling as snow across high ground in Scotland, and we're really going to see those winds strengthen in western areas overnight too, particularly in western parts of Wales, where we do have a red Met Office wind warning in force too. We could see gusts here reaching around 80 to 90 miles per hour. So for the start of Saturday then, it's going to be a very wet start across a lot of the country. Scotland seeing outbreaks of rain, still some hill snow across higher ground as well. And similar across northern parts of England, Northern Ireland, heavy outbreaks of rain and very strong winds, particularly around coastal areas, but even inland areas seeing some very strong gusts at times. Western parts of Wales likely to see severe gales here at times, making very difficult driving conditions. And on the whole, through Saturday, there is likely to be disruption as a result of the storm. The heavy outbreaks of rain continuing. Still a very windy day across a large portion of the country, particularly around western coasts. And looking at the temperatures too later on, we can see highs generally between 9 to 10 Celsius, but in those very, very strong winds as well. That's really going to add on to the wind chill, so it is going to feel a very chilly day, particularly under the rain and in those strong winds. Through into Sunday, we do start to see the weather settle down slightly. We do have some outbreaks of rain still, particularly in eastern areas, a few showers feeding into eastern parts of Scotland. The best of the weather, or the driest and brightest of the weather across Northern Ireland, western parts of Scotland. But it's still going to be a very blustery day on offer, and we won't really see more settled conditions until we head into next week. Bye for now.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Big problems in Staffordshire tonight, I'm afraid, at Burton-upon-Trent, where Derby Road is partly blocked northbound at the Derby Turn roundabout and the scene of an accident. Problems heading south of Cambridge into Essex, down the M11 from junction 10 to 9 towards Saffron Walden. There's been an accident blocking off the inside lane once. Bear in mind if you're heading further down towards Stansted. On the M1 in Bedfordshire, one lane shut northbound 11A to 12, just north of Dunstable, where a car's broken down further south on the M1 northbound. A lane is shut from 9 to 10 towards Luton following an accident, and the M23 down to a single lane northbound in West Sussex just north of Gatwick following a multi-vehicle crash. And in Hampshire north of Winchester, the A34 is closed northbound from the M3 up the Winchester bypass due to an ongoing incident. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and keeping me company until 7 o'clock, I've got Charlie Downs, political commentator, and Paul Embry, trade unionist and broadcaster. And you've been getting in touch with your views, particularly about tax rises. Will he or won't he? Dew says maybe they should just close the loopholes. Yes, very good. We were talking about how people with lots of wealth can employ accountants to get out of tax. Christina says, Starmer praises the civil servants, the people who take the private sector money to stay at home. We should reduce the number of civil servants. Well, that would surely save some money. And then we've got some comments about house buildings. Tim says, what happens to all the AI and robots that are going to replace our jobs? We were supposed to be needing fewer people in the future. Well, yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you can actually build houses off-site now, can't you? And then with robots and then bring them in, and that makes it a lot quicker. So maybe we'll see some of that towards the 1.5 million target. Well, let's move on to politics. A new poll suggests that Nigel Farage's Reform UK has overtaken Labour for the first time. The research from polling company Find Out Now gives Reform 24% of the vote, 1 point ahead of Labour, who are on 23%, and 2 points behind the Conservatives on 26%. So that means if a general election was held today, this poll could translate into 95 MPs in Parliament for Reform. Here's what Reform Chairman Zia Youssef said in response to that poll earlier today on GB News.
What's happening across the country is that the British people are realising that there is now a real viable alternative to the same two old parties. For the first time in a century in the UK, we are seeing the stranglehold of the two old parties start to slip. We have effectively a three-way dead heat in British politics now. And this is remarkable because remember, before the last general election, just 6 months ago, Reform had 0 MPs. Today, Reform, of course, have 5 brilliant MPs, and they do a far better job than the 121 Tory MPs of holding this dystopian Keir Starmer government to account.
Well, Nigel Farage, the Reform Party leader, has tweeted that they're just getting started. So, is he right? Can Reform break through Britain's two-party system? And should Labour or the Conservatives be more concerned? Charlie, this is unprecedented, certainly in modern times, that two parties are occupying what might be quite similar ground. And actually, the next election could be a disaster for the right if they do continue to compete.
Yeah, it's very true. I mean, this is the point that I see people missing, because as exciting as it is that Reform are polling so well in this one poll, you know, I've supported Reform for a couple of years. I think that they are possibly the only vehicle that real, you know, conservative-minded, traditional-minded people actually have in British politics. But with that being said, the Conservative Party is still beating them, right? And that should not be happening, because they are led by an incredibly weak leader in Kemi Badenoch, and the rhetorical and political space that
the only group that they're leading is amongst the over 65s, who possibly are, you know, loyal and always have been. So, you know, that may change over time.
Maybe so, maybe so. But I think it does speak to a certain appetite among the electorate for more from Reform, because this is certainly how I feel. Again, I want to see them do well, but I also think that they're leaving a lot of, you know, metaphorically speaking, a lot of money on the table. You know, there is an open goal sitting, waiting for them when it comes to things. You know, I mean, you know, there's been real disappointing rhetoric coming out of them on things like Islam, on things like deportation of illegals, on things like demographics. These are areas of policy and conversation that Reform should absolutely be dominating. Because if you look at their analogues on the continent, the National Rally in France, the AfD in Germany, they, every single day, they hit it. They leave no room for the establishment parties to make any ground. But Reform, I think, are still yet to kind of reach that level. Maybe they're playing it safe, I don't know. But
well, is that open goal, Paul, Labour voters? Is that who they're going to pick off next? And have they got a good chance?
I'd be a bit worried if I were Keir Starmer. It's early days, but we could be seeing another realignment in British politics. I wouldn't rule that out. They polled well at the general election in a lot of red wall constituencies. Labour's vote amongst the C2DEs, which is the occupational working class, did not rise in this election this year compared to 2019. They did a lot better, obviously, overall, but their vote among the C2DEs did not rise, and I think a lot of those people would be seen by Reform as fertile territory. Because, as I said, they did do well and came second in a lot of red wall constituencies. So unless Starmer gets a grip on, I think, three key issues, he needs to get growth in the economy, he needs to make working class people feel better off, get more disposable income in their pockets, get NHS waiting lists down. The NHS is broken, there's no question about it. We're seeing record waiting lists. That concerns people. They need to be driven down. And immigration, the immigration and asylum system is absolutely broken. And until he gets a grip on that and shows that he has got the wherewithal and the nous to be able to get a grip on the borders and to reduce the numbers, and he's talking a good game at the moment. He did the big set-piece media conference the other day where he talks about the Tories running an open borders experiment and all the rest of it. Well, it's great in terms of rhetoric, but what people are interested in is results, not because they're anti-immigration, but because we cannot sustain a situation like we've got at the moment.
But is there a problem that, you know, and I've got every respect for anybody who ever stands for election, because it's hard. So I respect Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, you know, he's been elected. But in a media age, he does suffer from a lack of charisma, which, let's face it, Nigel Farage does not. Is he going to struggle to gain in popularity when actually there's this upstart party that's gaining that kind of traction amongst working class voters, like you say?
He does lack charisma, and that's an important thing in today's politics, but it's not the be-all and end-all, I don't think. I think often people overstate the importance of it. If you're getting results, if you're delivering on people's key priorities, then I think they will forgive you being a little bit wooden and not being, you know, the brightest spark at the party. So I don't think that is necessarily his big issue. I talked about Clement Attlee earlier. Well, he was regarded as this really kind of drab, monosyllabic figure, and he went up against Churchill, don't forget, who was a
But
lion,
that was in a
war
different
leader.
age, when most people didn't even know what their politicians looked like.
I get that, but in principle, you had two completely different personalities. You had the great personality that Churchill was the war leader, and Attlee as his sort of boring figure. But he won the landslide for the Labour Party and delivered for people. So from Starmer's point of view, of course, it's a different age, social media and all the rest of it. I get that completely. But if you deliver on people's priorities, as I say, they will set aside the things that you're not particularly good at, which is speaking, and having charisma and things like that.
Now, Charlie, you said that there's room for reform to grow, perhaps go even higher in the polls. But do you think as they become a more established party, they will face similar problems to the Conservative Party, which is that they've got to decide what they believe on certain issues? Now, we know what they think about net zero and we know what they think about immigration, but what's their tax policy? What's their health policy? What are their social policies? They were completely split on assisted suicide, much more split than any other party.
Well, this is crucial because on the other end of this, whilst Keir Starmer might not have any charisma, it's true that Nigel Farage and others in Reform, Rupert Lowe, I think, is especially good. They are charismatic, but when it comes to substance, we're seeing a lot of people still saying, well, where do you actually stand on a lot of these things? Because you can't be all things to all men. If you want to go from being an insurgent party to a potential party of government, there has to be a level of seriousness that I think a lot of people are still kind of waiting for when it comes to reform. Because you're right, we don't know where they stand on a lot of different issues. And as effective a leader as Nigel Farage is when it comes to winning an election, if you listen to Tony Blair of all people, he always says this. He says the skill set required before an election is totally different to the skill set required after an election, because after the election, you're dealing with the nuts and bolts of politics, the day-to-day business of leadership, and I think Reform is still adjusting to that.
Yeah. The problem for some is if that sink in the polls becomes a trend, because they have sunk quite substantially since the election, in terms of the popularity, there's no doubt about that. If it becomes a trend, that's when it becomes a problem. I mean, the Tories, for example, they won the 92 general election in the spring, and then we had Black Wednesday in the September, where we crashed out of the ERM and interest rates shot up and so on. And at that point, I think there was no way back for the Tories. Whatever they did, and then we had the recovery the next year, and by the time of the 97 general election, the economy was in a pretty good state. But I think the die was cast because people remembered that, and from there on in, the Tories were never going to win. And I think the danger for Starmer is if the sort of levels of unpopularity that he's experiencing at the moment continue, which they may do, it then becomes very difficult to break that. It was a loveless landslide.
Yes, it certainly was. I think only 1 in 5 adults actually voted Labour once you account for the low turnout. But what Starmer does have in his favour is the first past the post. And if we get to the next election and the vote to the right is evenly split between the Conservatives and Reform, which it could easily be, then even a very unpopular Labour Party on 25% of the vote could still come through the middle and be the biggest party in Parliament.
Yeah, well, there's two interesting things to say here. The first is, this speaks to perhaps the need for Reform and the Conservative Party to have a chat. Right? And to maybe come up with some kind of strategy where that doesn't happen. Because that would be disastrous for the country. And if the country is what we care about here, then surely that has to happen. The second thing is, it's interesting how Reform... I think I've actually lost my train of thought there. That's very embarrassing. Sorry.
Well, but I think one issue, though, with the potential pact is that although Reform and Conservatives may occupy similar ground on a policy, certainly my experience of knocking on doors was that there are plenty of Reform voters who say, I wouldn't vote Conservative over my dead body, and plenty of Conservative voters who would never vote Reform over their dead body. So any kind of no-stand pact is going to be quite difficult to sell.
That's true, but I think they can sell it, because when we again put aside these petty differences and say, the interests of the nation and what we are prioritising here, then that's good. The point that I was going to make is Labour was, as you said, it was a loveless landslide, right? People were voting Labour as an anti-Tory vote. I don't think many people really realised what we would get with this Labour government. But I think a lot of people who are swinging to Reform, it's actually a similar kind of thing. It's more of an anti-Labour vote and also an anti-Tory vote than it is a pro-Reform vote. And again, that comes as a result of the lack of substance at this stage. And again, I think we will see more people go to Reform if they capture that rhetorical and political ground that as I say, I think they're leaving on the table at the moment.
Could be Reform play a similar role traditionally to the Lib Dems when it comes to sort of mid-term in the Parliament, where the Lib Dems always do brilliantly at by-elections, and everyone says this is the bright new dawn for the Lib Dems, and they're on their way to government and so on. And it never works, of course. No. It never happens like that. They're very much a protest vote between elections, and it could be that Reform are seen as that way, that people are really angry. Not just Tory voters, but Labour voters as well, and say, actually, this guy Farage, he's saying the right things. But when it comes to a general election, they say, do I actually
Not
want
sure.
these people in charge of the country? That's when the real test.
Well, I remember
I'd
when
love to
they
see
all
the Tories
said,
wiped
I
out,
agree with Nick Clegg. That used to be the refrain. That seems a long time ago.
Yeah.
Anyway, coming up, a new weight loss jab could be available on the NHS, but only to a fraction of those patients who are eligible for the treatment. Is this a false economy, or should we expect people to take more responsibility for their own health? Don't go away.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Now we're joined now by Sophia Viraji, the co-founder of the Azealia Foundation, which was created due to the tragic passing of her 8-month-old daughter to leukemia. The foundation is doing some incredible work for children's cancer.
Yeah, some really incredible stuff. They've just launched a PhD even where they're funding young doctors to specialise in childhood cancer as, get this, I wasn't aware of this, it's one of the most underfunded areas in the NHS. So not many sectors choose to go down that route, unfortunately. The charity, the foundation, have donated over £1 million worth of equipment to hospitals as well, and we're delighted to welcome Sophia. You've turned a tragedy and grief into triumph, I guess, and something so inspiring. Just tell us about that. Do you recognise that in yourself and the work you're doing?
Yeah, I'm here to always honour my daughter and to always continue her name, her legacy, and to support all of these other children fighting against childhood cancer.
It was all over social media. I mean, you were, at one point, probably one of the most famous families in this country because of Azealia and Azalia's fight. When you look back now at that time, does it give you comfort that you had so many people behind you?
Absolutely. The community that we have got, the humanity that we've seen in the UK and all around the world, in fact, has really touched my heart, and that kindness, love and support has always been the backbone of carrying me through this, to give me hope, to give me belief, and it still inspires me and encourages me till today to continue to do that, to show that light, to show that courage and bravery.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Miriam Cates, and keeping me company until 7 o'clock, I've got Charlie Downs, political commentator, and Paul Embry, trade unionist and broadcaster. Now, a new weight loss jab, Mounjaro, will be available on the NHS in England from March, but it could take up to 12 years for everyone who is eligible to benefit. NHS representatives have said that they're worried the health service will be overwhelmed by demand for the jab. Now, 3.4 million people are thought to be eligible for it, but just 220,000 patients will be given the drug as part of the initial rollout. So is this a missed opportunity to cut down on the huge costs of obesity, or should we expect people to take more responsibility for their health? Charlie, where do you stand on this? Should we be giving everybody who's obese this jab and just letting them get on with it, or is there more to it than that?
Well, I mean, of course there's more to it than that. Again, this is another one of these issues where we are treating symptoms and not causes, because there has to be a conversation about the fact that the quality of our food in the West has deteriorated massively over the last few decades. You know, if you look, and we've been talking today about the role of the state and the role of the government. I think there is maybe, only a handful of issues more important for the government to ensure than that affordable, high-quality food is available for as many people as possible, because the knock-on effects that has on things like IQ, on things things like just, life expectancy, well-being, it's huge. But we have, gotten into this situation, again, I think partly because of the economic system we live under, where the shelves of the supermarkets are heaving with these food-like substances. But if you read the ingredient list, it's just slop. It's like fake chemical stuff. And most people are eating this stuff. And you can't blame them because it's affordable. But there is a more fundamental issue here. And I think if we don't address that, then this is not going to get anything any better. And if we treat the symptoms in this kind of superficial way using these treatments that we're talking about, I think it's actually only going to get worse.
But should we not do both, Paul? Address what our kids are eating and, crack down on some of the companies that are just pumping out these chemicals, but also act on obesity, even if it's just to save money for the NHS?
We absolutely should act on obesity because it's a serious issue, and I'm not an anti-jabber by instinct, if you like. I'm not kind of anti-vaccine and stuff like that, but I am actually quite uneasy about the idea of a medical intervention to address what is ultimately, a social stroke cultural issue. Something that can be resolved, maybe not for everybody, but for most people through a much better diet and through exercise. And it seems to me that this is almost a shortcut to addressing something that should be addressed through those two things, through better diet and better exercise.
And inevitably, Paul, this will become an industry, and that's the dark thing about it, is there is an incentive there for to keep the population.
Well, the manufacturers came out today and pressured the government and were saying, look, we can help you, we can help you drive down obesity.
This is the problem with the pharmaceutical industry, is it incentivises poor health because that's how they make their money. And again, we have to look at the companies that our politicians are taking money from. Not naming any names, but there has to be some kind of conversation about that as well.
But is this also the legacy of having a health system that is free at the point of use? And I know we're all very attached to that, but actually people don't understand the cost of healthcare, because it doesn't matter what you do to your body or how poor your lifestyle is, you will get free treatment. Now, I'm not arguing for a privatised system, but on the other hand, at the moment, there is no cost. I mean, imagine you have a car and you don't look after it and the state will service it for you anyway.
I don't think so, Miriam, because I think we've had healthcare free at the point of use since the end of the Second World War. The Attlee government, let me just get that in again, when they created the National Health Service. You
should write a book about it.
The Labour government created the National Health Service. And so it's been free at the point of use since then. But if you look, and funnily enough, I was looking at an old cine film the other day. My granddad had a cine camera back in the 1960s. And I was looking at one of the old cine films, and it was taken in the 1960s. It was at a holiday camp. Everybody was thin. Everybody was thin, and everybody looked quite fit. And I imagine their diet was better. They didn't have kids who were just sitting and staring at computers or smartphones all day. They were going out on their bikes. They were even in the 80s when I was growing up, it was a similar sort of thing. So I don't think it is as easy as just simply saying, oh, people are just relying on the NHS to help them lose weight if they ever get it. It's very much a cultural thing.
But there's no disincentive to be fat. Well, there is amongst certain social groups. I mean, rich people are skinny, let's be honest. There's a big differential. But, some countries have done successful things. Japan, for example, brought in a law where if you don't lose weight, your employer gets fined. I mean, it sounds insane. Could you do that here? But
that's the end of their sumo wrestling industry.
Well, but the average BMI in Japan is 23. So
That's hilarious.
Maybe there are exceptions, carve-outs if you're a sumo wrestler. I don't know.
But I mean, there was a time. Look, let's just be real here. There was a time where there was a social stigma around being overweight, right? And perhaps rightfully so, because it does make you more of a burden on the people around you. It's not good for your own health and all of this. But again, for me, this comes back, like some of the other issues that we've spoken about today, to a sense of society and a sense of shared identity. Because if we have a nationalised healthcare system, which I'm in favour of, I don't like this kind of American attitude where it is, oh, if my neighbour gets cancer, that's his problem. It's nothing to do with me. Actually, that's your countryman. Like, what kind of an attitude is that? But if we had a sense that it was your duty to be healthy, right, this is key, then I think that a lot of these issues would go away, because there wouldn't be this sense that, oh, it's fine, I'll just use the NHS, it's free. Because actually, if it's your duty to be healthy, then
But exactly, but how do you introduce that duty?
Well, I think part of it is education. I think there needs to be a far more intense focus on physical health in education. I think that young people, children should be, I think a third of their time should be spent outside. I think a third of their time should be spent on the pitch, right? Because it's good for you, it's good for your character, gives you a sense of, I think it teaches you about life, I play a lot of sports, and it really does give you a set of values that you don't have if you don't.
Character building.
It's funny how in these days when we obsess about people's health and mental health and this culture of safetyism, that actually obesity is almost like a taboo.
Yes.
You're not allowed to say to somebody, or it's frowned upon if you say to someone, actually you're overweight and you need to address that because it has health impacts and it can have knock-on effects on their family and so on. I think the ad industry has got a bit to answer for as well. When you look at the ad industry, essentially, parading people who are quite heavily overweight in some
beautiful at any size.
And kind of saying, it's any size, it takes all sorts of... I do get why they're doing it because they want to be inclusive and all the rest of it, but you also have to think, well, is it wise to send a message that it's fine to be obese? Because it isn't.
And I think some parents are even frightened to raise it with their own children because they've been warned that you might damage your child's mental health, but actually what they really need is for the parent to help them lose weight.
It's this like mind poison of egalitarianism that we have that pervades every area of life in the West, where it's like you can't draw a value or qualitative differential between two lifestyles because you might upset somebody and you might affect their mental health and whatever else. No, it is better to be fit. That shouldn't be a controversial
I think also there have been big cultural changes that aren't just ultra-processed foods. So, for example, I remember my mum saying that when she was a child, it was not the done thing to eat on the move. You didn't eat in the street, and now we do that all the time. We have cafe culture now, which is kind of nice, but when you go into Costa Coffee and you see that the best cake for you is 450 calories, our culture's changed very much.
I think this is going to sound terribly sort of conservative of me, but I think there is... I think there is an absence of self-restraint generally, not just when it comes to food, but people... I think we live in quite a selfish age where people want kind of instant gratification and then challenge anyone who says that might not be good for you because it's about me and it's about my individualism and my body is sovereign, I've got the right to do what I want to do, which is why I think drug culture has proliferated so much. So I think there absolutely are wider socio-cultural issues at play.
Let's make the virtues great again.
Indeed, yes, none of this should be controversial, but the fact that we live in a culture that demonises these kinds of positions where we do say it's better to be fit than not fit, it's good to have self-control and self-restraint, discipline is a virtue. The fact that those are coded as conservative and not just common sense.
Well, I think we're so frightened of criticising anyone now because we don't want to emotionally harm them, but actually it's often the best thing to hear that kind of tough love, and then you can change your behaviour.
And frankly, parents should kick their children out of the house. When they're spending hours, and I've got two kids, I know how easy it is just to think, they're up in their bedroom, leave them alone. Actually, you should kick them out of the house and you should say to them, go and knock on your friend's door, go over the park, go and take a bike out, because those experiences are nice memory banks to build anyway, I think, for the future.
You don't see that. You don't see that anymore.
It's much better emotionally and physical for children to have that interaction with other kids outside of the home. Better for their physical fitness, better for their emotional fitness.
More sport in school too. I know a lot of
100%.
primary schools, it's raining today, we can't do PE. Maybe there should be a legal requirement for an hour a day.
Well, again, you look at, like you were saying about the films that you were watching from the 60s, was it? You look at footage out of, like, America, for example, old, physical education classes, all of they're doing pull-ups, they're climbing ropes, they're running in the field, all this sort of thing. You don't see that sort of thing anymore. It's a very flattened, very kind of sterile kind of physical education we have now, and I don't think it really does the job.
Well, kick your kids out the house, don't let them eat junk food, and let's get healthy again. Well, thank you so much to both my panel for an excellent show. Thank you so much for watching. Michelle will be back next week, so please do join us. You've been watching Dewbs & Co. on GB News with me, Miriam Cates.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, good evening. Welcome to your GB News weather update from the Met Office. Storm Dara is expected to bring heavy outbreaks of rain and some severe gales at times as we head into the weekend. Hail snow too for Scotland, and there are multiple Met Office warnings in force, so do stay up to date on our website for those. This is Storm Dara here out to the west, bringing in heavy outbreaks of rain alongside these frontal systems and a good squeeze in the Isobars, so very strong winds at times across the bulk of the country, particularly around western coasts. These outbreaks of rain are set to continue overnight, still falling as snow across high ground in Scotland, and we're really going to see those winds strengthen in western areas overnight too, particularly in western parts of Wales where we do have a red Met Office wind warning in force too. We could see gusts here reaching around 80 to 90 miles per hour. So for the start of Saturday then, it's going to be a very wet start across a lot of the country. Scotland seeing outbreaks of rain, still some hill snow across higher ground as well. And similar across northern parts of England, Northern Ireland, heavy outbreaks of rain and very strong winds, particularly around coastal areas, but even inland areas seeing some very strong gusts at times. Western parts of Wales likely to see severe gales here at times, making very difficult driving conditions. And on the whole through Saturday, there is likely to be disruption as a result of the storm. The heavy outbreaks of rain continuing. Still a very windy day across a large portion of the country, particularly around western coasts. And looking at the temperatures too later on, we can see highs generally between 9 to 10 Celsius, but in those very, very strong winds as well, that's really going to add onto the wind chill. So it is going to feel a very chilly day, particularly under the rain and in those strong winds. Through into Sunday, we do start to see the weather settle down slightly. We do have some outbreaks of rain still, particularly in eastern areas, a few showers feeding into eastern parts of Scotland. The best of the weather, or the driest and brightest of the weather across Northern Ireland, western parts of Scotland, but it's still going to be a very blustery day on offer, and we won't really see more settled conditions until we head into next week. Bye for now.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.